USA, a provider of global security, training and logistics solutions to the US government and others, which he sold in 2010, and Presidential Airways, a global transportation company with over 70 aircraft operating in emerging markets. Mr. Prince is married, and between himself and his wife Stacy, enjoy raising 12 children. He was educated at Hillsday College in Michigan, and upon graduation joined the US Navy, where he served as a Navy SEAL officer until 1996. Mr. Prince's philanthropic endeavors are focused on refugees, humanitarian relief, and economic development. Mr. Prince's career of extensive professional engagements throughout the world give him a unique perspective on developing economic trends, opportunities, and risks to consider. Mr. Prince.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Wanted me to talk about contractors, past, present, and future. So I will do a quick run through the past, or maybe part of the education you didn't hear in class. America, remember, was started not by British soldiers, it was started by companies. Companies like the Massachusetts Bay, Plymouth, and Jamestown, companies that were listed on the London Stock Exchange. They hired people like John Smith and Miles Standish, professional private military contractors that had fought in Europe as soldiers for the crown, and they hired on as companies, as security, basically as a security manager to come over and help secure these colonies. Remember, the first elements of the US Army were basically those Minutemen type units formed by those colonies. Across the street from the White House, if you visit Washington, you'll find Lafayette Park, where someone in Washington thought enough of contractors 100 years ago to build statues to these guys. Lafayette, Rochambeau, Von Steuben, Kosciuszko, foreigners, mercenaries, contractors that came and built the Continental Army. The first Inspector General of the U.S. Army, Baron Von Steuben. The founder of American artillery, Kosciuszko, a Pole. There's even a 30-foot tall statue of him at West Point alone. Apostasy, imagine a contractor statue at West Point. At sea, 9 out of 10 ships taken during the American Revolution were taken by privateers. Private ship, private crew, a profit motive. They had a hunting license that they got from Congress. It's called a letter of marque and reprisal. Go out and attack enemy shipping. And they did. They did well. Even George Washington, America's founding father, was an investor in a privateer. Fast forward a bit through the ages, through the century. Whether it's securing the West, securing infrastructure, the Pinkertons were, for many years, much larger than the United States Army. You had intelligence on the battlefield, and Alan Pinkerton, the original private eye, was hired to do counterintelligence and security in a, you can imagine, a very split capital in 1862. Now, the U.S. military has never been a big adapter when it comes to change. They tend to adapt pretty slowly, right? And you think about a guy named William Gatling, who developed the Gatling gun, right? He developed it from a corn planter, and he tried to sell it to the U.S. Army in 1862, when there was a Civil War on. You think you'd want a nice high-fire weapon, high-speed weapon to fire. And the chief of U.S. Army Ordnance said, why would I want a gun that consumes so much ammunition? But Gatling persisted. He eventually got a live-fire demo done for Abraham Lincoln on the National Mall up in front of the White House, and the Gatling gun came to be and then helped win the end of the war for the North. An aircraft, also an American invention. Okay, the Wright brothers persisted and finally launched that aircraft off a sand dune in North Carolina, and they flew it. The U.S. Army wanted nothing to do with it. The French did. The French bought it first. The U.S. Army, we have aerostats and balloons. Why would we ever need an airplane? So again, the idea of the U.S. military, of the Pentagon not being quick adapters to what's changing, I'm not surprised. There's a lot of talk about Afghanistan earlier, and what to do about contractors in Afghanistan, all the rest. So let me lay this scenario for you. Imagine you had a prime contractor whose sole responsibility was to build and stabilize the Afghan security forces, and they've been doing it for the last 17 years. They've consumed more than $1 trillion of U.S. taxpayer money. The US taxpayers are on the hook for another $1 trillion in veterans' health care costs. And despite of that 17 years, now the friendly government only controls 30% of the terrain. The partner forces in country are losing hundreds per month. In fact, the attrition rate of the Afghan forces now is 3% per month. Dead, wounded, or deserted. You annualize out 3% a month, that's 36% a year. 36% of your force per year is out the door and gone, not to be replaced. A truly unsustainable number. 70%, right, if the whole reason the US forces are in Afghanistan is to deny terror sanctuary, the friendly government only controls 30%, the other 70% is under the control or is regularly contested by the Taliban, by Daesh, or any of the other 20-some terror forces that are resident in Afghanistan. So I would call that a problem. Imagine if that was in the hands of one contractor, would you fire them? Or would you at least start to ask accountability questions as to what are we doing as a country, allowing that kind of paradigm to persist for 17 years? The military-industrial complex is a real thing, okay? Everything that General Eisenhower warned about is real. Washington is about money and power, okay? And people will say, they'll be concerned, wow, there's a profit motive in privatization of contractors and all the rest. Hey, we're spending as a country this year $62 billion in Afghanistan. We're spending $5 billion to support the Afghan security forces. That's the stroke of the check just to pay for the Afghan Army, police, and Air Force, $5 billion. We're spending $57 billion to support the US presence there, okay? So our 15,000 US forces cost the taxpayers $57 billion. Now remember, that's money we don't even have. Look at the deficit the United States runs every year. Our deficit now is so large, $21 trillion, that even the Chinese debt portion of US foreign debt holdings, our interest on that funds their defense budget, okay? So for people to say, wow, turning to contractors, privatization, rationalization, we can't do that. Hey, we have a very real debt problem. Maybe not right now, but the interest rates can't stay low forever. And remember, all that money we spend in deficit every year racks up that debt. And the interest payments they don't stay in America. So we have a problem. If our reason for being there was to deny terror sanctuary, that's a fail. Because clearly there's a lot of sanctuary because they can launch and attack Kabul, or for heaven's sakes, 2 weeks ago, they put a gunman in the room with the US commander and they killed General Razak, a friend of mine. Okay, I had dinner with General Razak 3 weeks before he died. He was a big supporter of rationalization. What a brave man he was. They tried to kill him more than 24 times and he didn't quit. They killed many of his family, and he didn't blink, he didn't quit, and a true warrior to the end. So we owe it to the Afghans to get it right. We owe it to ourselves to get it right, because if the mighty US military, the most powerful and expensive military in the history of mankind, gets defeated by largely illiterate goat herders using very simple weapons, AKs, PKs, Dishkas, and homemade explosives, okay? We have a real problem because that empowers every jihadi crazy in the world. I walk through the Association of the U.S. Army's convention, and I cringe because they have all that stuff, all that equipment, tens of billions of dollars of stuff of every kind of radar, communications gear, night vision, all the rest. And we're still losing to very, very basic, primitive tactics that are working. So we have to get this right. I have sons your age, and a couple of them will join soon. And the idea of them going to Afghanistan to get blown up or dead, I wanted no part of. I've been paying attention to peace in Afghanistan since 1998, when I funded a year ago, a peace conference. We were trying to get the king, Zahir Shah, to go back from his exile, comfortable exile in Rome, go back and have a big peace conference long before 9/11. But alas, Rome was a little too comfortable and he didn't go. But I got to know a lot of those, a lot of the players in Afghanistan, and so I've kept in touch with them ever since. But seeing, I first got to Afghanistan in April of 2002, and it was right at the inflection point. Okay, right when we were going from a very special operations, unconventional warfare approach to where Bagram Air Force Base became a saluting zone. Okay, remember, after 9/11, okay, 5 days after 9/11, while the Pentagon is still smoldering, George Bush met with his National Security Cabinet at Camp David. And they needed a war plan. They needed to figure out what to do. This is what the Pentagon offered. They wanted to do a conventional invasion of Afghanistan via Pakistan, and they wanted to do it the following April. They didn't want to do anything that fall. They wanted to do missiles, bombs, and a Ranger raid. That's all the Pentagon, the most expensive military in the world, wanted to do in Afghanistan for the first 6 months of the conflict, while their headquarters was still smoldering. It was the agency that said, Mr. President, give us authorities, $1 billion, and I quote, and in 3 weeks, the flies will be walking on the eyeballs of our enemies. It was their approach, the way they've done unconventional war in Africa and elsewhere, the previous 2 decades, worked. Okay? You've seen the movie maybe 12 Strong. It's a small microcosm. There's a lot of case officers that went in that had contact with the warlords, with radios, money, air power, less than 100 SOF and CIA people, and they stomped the hell out of the Taliban in a matter of weeks. With relentless pursuit, and believe me, you could drive around Kabul in a thin-skinned vehicle. With that kind of relentless pressure, those guys were literally running for the hills, running for their lives. When we transitioned to a very conventional military approach, that following spring, we've gone backwards ever since. We basically replicated the Soviet battle plan. Now there's absolutely a place for the conventional military, and that's in Fulda Gap, and that's in defeating Saddam's conventional army forces. But you're fighting now in Afghanistan against herdsmen, hillsmen, guys that will move into battle on foot, horse, or motorbike, okay? We're not fighting motorized Soviet rifle regiments. Let's go back to what worked in the past. I wrote that op-ed a year ago, May, in the Wall Street Journal, calling for a different approach. I wrote it for an audience of 1 to read, and it worked. The president read it sitting at his desk. He circled it. He called in the National Security Advisor, said, I don't like your plan. I like this one. Do this. Probably didn't start things off on the right foot with General McMaster and me. But General McMaster is a 3-star Army officer who wanted his 4-star. General Kelly, 4-star Marine General, very conventional. I don't take anything away from his soldiering. Secretary Mattis, 4-star Marine General, again, a very conventional approach. The idea of changing the paradigm and going back to something unconventional, haram, okay? Impossible. That being said, the White House still asked. They asked for a plan. They wanted a budget. Having been in Afghanistan for a lot of years and run thousands of people there, I had 56 aircraft there at one point serving the U.S. military, as big as the U.S. military is, with thousands of aircraft, okay? Biggest air force in the world, the U.S. Air Force. Second biggest, U.S. Navy. Even despite all that, they still needed different kind of aircraft to do that mission. We had 56 birds there. So I went through a plan with my old team and came up with the following, right? We had to address 3, I think, fatal failings. And even Secretary Mattis, once I gave him the brief at the NSC, he said, my analysis of the root problems were the best that he saw. 1, we've never figured out or fixed the continuity issue in Afghanistan. U.S. military deploys, maybe the Marine Corps goes for 6 months, Army would go for 8 or 10 or 12 months, or maybe a little bit longer. They spend the first few months getting to know the area. Next few months they're productive. Last few months making sure everybody goes home. pack up the inventory, turn over, leave. You lift that unit up, send it back to the States, never to return again to the same area, ever. Send a new unit in, repeat. We've done that 30 rotations now. Einstein had a word for that. It's called insanity, okay? You have no continuity in that area, but the Taliban, they're not commuting to war. They've been there. The Taliban that have survived are smart soldiers. They know exactly how long the U.S. aircraft takes to show up, how they target, how the U.S. patrols, all the rest. I figured basically replicating the Afghan commando model, which is mentored and trained by the U.S. Special Forces counterparts. And let me just add one difference. And this is, again, different role between Special Forces and conventional forces. In a Special Forces unit, you equip the man. The man is the weapon system, okay? Because you're not carrying a lot of stuff into battle with you. In a conventional military, the artillery, rockets, armor does the fighting, the heavy fighting and the killing, okay? You man the equipment. It is a fundamental paradigm difference, and we need both. But fighting against guys on motorbikes and flip-flops, you probably need to fight a little lighter and a little faster. So using that Special Forces model, put a 36-man mentor team into every Afghan battalion. And because they're Special Forces veterans, chances are they've been to that area before. We've already used that skill set. The taxpayers have already paid for it. Everybody loves to praise veterans on Veterans Day. Then they like to call them mercenaries if they go back as contractors. No, they're veterans volunteering to serve their country yet again. But I can pay them to go in there longer term. They're gonna go in for 90 days, home for 30. Back in for 90, home for 30. But they'll go there 2 and 3 and 4 years to the same valley with the same battalion. They know good mullah from bad mullah. They know the village chief. They know the orphan lady or the widow lady on the corner. They know the area. And believe me, they'll have continuity with that unit and that bond of brotherhood in war. Those mentors will make darn sure that Afghan battalion is paid on time and fed on time, that they're supplied and they're trained and they operate. And those mentors, okay, they're not going to be using excessive force. And if they are, there's a means to that, and we'll get to that. But they're going back to the same area, in that same valley. They have to build that continuity in that area to dominate that battle space. If the Afghans know that there's a professional, that their big brother is with them, and going outside the wire with them every day. I went with a 36-man team, right? Normally a 14-man Special Forces A team, and they say an 18 can build a battalion. I needed a bigger, a fatter mix this time, so that we had enough mentors to go down to the company and even platoon level, so that whenever an Afghan unit left the wire, there'd be professionals with them. So they could call an air, fire support plan, medical, comms. Those essential combat enablers. So that's one. Another important point of that, they would not be serving as U.S. military contractors. They would be serving as Afghan Army, as adjuncts in the Afghan Army, which even by UN definition makes them not mercenaries. Okay? They're in the Afghan chain of command. If we believe in an Afghanization of the effort, well then let the Afghans hire for it. Okay? Stop dictating everything from the Pentagon and from CENTCOM. Give the Afghans a little bit more means to sort it out. You can give them more operational control. Financial control can still stay with a U.S. control structure. Second, air power. Just like what worked with Special Forces guys on horseback, calling in B-52s, having reliable air power is essential. I cringe. I get really angry when you read on an almost daily basis about yet another Afghan base getting surrounded and overrun and annihilated. 30 dead, 20 wounded. 60 dead, 20 wounded, 20 captured. And they're dying ugly, okay? Why? Because the Taliban rolls in with 200, 400, 500 guys. Amazing how with all of our surveillance capability, the Taliban can still move that many people. I find that embarrassing. But if they do, it's a wonderful opportunity to surround and maneuver on them and to destroy them. Reliable air power, again, contractor in one cockpit, Afghan in the other. Afghan tail numbers, Afghan rules of engagement, to include strike aircraft, helicopter gunships, lift, medevac, and resupply. When that poor Afghan base commander right now is surrounded in day 2, day 6, day 8, nobody's evacuated, is dead or wounded, he's out of ammo, and he finally surrenders and gets slaughtered. Come on, that's unacceptable. It is happening on a weekly, if not daily basis in Afghanistan today. Despite the fact that we're spending $62 billion, who's accountable for that? I used to have a lot of aircraft in country. We went, in fact, we got into the airdrop business because of an exact example like that. In 2005, there was a company-sized unit of the 82nd Airborne in a big firefight. And some of their support guys came to us on the ramp. And they said, our guys are running out of ammo. No one will drop ammo to them because the Air Force won't do it because it's not a surveyed drop zone. Will you guys do it? My guys, my airplanes, of course they said yes. Good Samaritan rule always applied in our company. And off they went. The Army guys put the drop zone panel on the hood of the Hummer, and the first bundle hit the hood of the Hummer less than an hour later from a cold stop, no prior planning. So it's not that hard to do the basics right, but sadly, after 17 years, the Pentagon has bureaucratized itself into stasis, and to the point of all that stuff and all those resources, and they can't seem to organize to do some of those basics. So again, if you have the Taliban that's maneuvered and they have 400 or whatever conventional fight they're going to give you that day, that we're not using our mobility capability to surround them, because remember, there's not a lot of superhighways in Afghanistan. There's no 4-lane roads, maybe one. But when the Taliban's maneuvering, they're on motorbike or foot. The ability to block them in by blocking 2 or 3 arteries with a small blocking force, like the Rhodesian Fire Force would have done, to surround and destroy them. That's why the Fire Force killed 87% of the people they came in contact with. We adopt that tactic in Afghanistan, and you'll have a very different turnaround. If you show video of 100 Taliban dead, getting pushed into a ditch by a bulldozer, message sent. But we haven't done that since 2001. The third part, governance. Now, this is not governance in terms of governing villages. I would say it's in the logistics support of the Afghan military. You have a huge ghost soldier problem, right? Huge over-reporting of middle commanders of the amount of people because they're skimming the payroll. Because you're going to have mentors now at every battalion doing a head count and an ammo count and a weapon count. Very simple, okay? Not only do you get a better promotion report as to who should be the next NCO or the next officer based on merit, not based on their bribe or their tribe or their religion, which is how it works now in the Afghan forces. But you eliminate the overpayment, the ghost soldier issue. You have to make sure that the men are paid, fed, and led. There are 7 Afghan corps, and there's 7 distribution facilities through which all the food, fuel, parts, and ammunition flows. That's your nexus of corruption. You put some logistics controllers there, basically guys with clipboards or barcodes, and you monitor. Now remember, this is just to control the $5 billion that you're spending on the Afghan forces. All the personnel I've talked about, the guy in the previous panel said 6,000. That's about right. About 3,600 mentors, about 1,500 for the air wing, another 1,500 or so in governance support. The other piece of governance support is combat medicine. You're 7 times as likely to die if you're an Afghan soldier, if you get wounded. A lot of times guys are dying a week, 2 weeks later at some remote outpost because they can't even get antibiotics. So they're dying from a wound that goes septic. Unacceptable, okay? People fight harder if they know someone actually cares and will patch them up. And again, we have violated that trust in Afghanistan. So that's why people are voting with their feet and deserting, and you have a 3% attrition per month. So, again, what does it take to do that? 6,000. You have 30,000 contractors in country right now. So this is not a privatization. Any business guy would look at this and say that's a rationalization, okay? The total bill for the 6,000 that I lay out with all the aircraft, 91 aircraft, all the food, fuel, ammunition, including all the ordnance those aircraft can drop once a week. Okay, it's a heavy, I don't do things light in that sense. Comes to $3.7 billion. Okay? You keep your $5 billion for your Afghan security forces, 3.7, you keep another $2 billion for 2,000 US SOF to stay in country. You keep a unilateral direct action capability, and there the quality oversight management, you embed some of those guys across every one of those battalions, and so you have a US E8, E9, SFNCO, or staff officer doing overall command and control and quality observation to see and to verify what's going on. It allows you to do a real rationalization. Like I said, 70% of the country is not under the control of the government. There's lots of places to do a trial run. Rough places like Nangarhar, Helmand, and sadly even many parts of the north. So we'll see. Nothing lasts forever. I know the president is upset about the total lack of progress. We were just about there and convincing him a year ago in August. But the race riot, the terrible thing that happened in Charlottesville, pounded him politically. He didn't want to make a big change. But I think the Pentagon got everything they wanted, and I don't think any observer, please be honest with ourselves, who could say that our 17 years, trillions of dollars, 2,400 US dead, tens of thousands of wounded, has been a raging success? I would disagree. And look, I've got a lot of other things. I spend most of my time mining and looking for natural resources in weird places of the world. This would be a passion project. The private sector can do this. The business of America is business. It's not warfare. And I think one of the real problems in our statecraft, call it the continuum of statecraft, right? You have diplomacy, embassies, international conferences on one end. On the other end, you have strategic nuclear triad, carrier battle groups, armored divisions, and you have that big mushy middle, okay? Which is where the intelligence world should be. We have political warfare, covert action, subversion. This is the kind of thing, and this kind of effort, we should go back to, again, what worked after 9/11. The United States went into Afghanistan, it was under Title 50 authorities, right? The B-52 pilot was chopped. His chain of command was the Director of Central Intelligence. It was not CENTCOM, okay? Those SF guys went in under the authorities and direction of the CIA director, Title 50. When the SEALs went cross-border into Pakistan to get bin Laden, Title 50. The Title 50 authorities have existed since 1947, the Intelligence Act back then, to handle these kind of areas of the continuum in the middle. The problem is, when we've got away from doing that, it makes everything tilts towards a DoD solution. And with it comes a huge expense, a fairly clumsy approach in a lot of cases. We're trying to mow the lawn with a Porsche, okay? You can do that, but it's expensive and it doesn't help you get around the edges very well. So, again, go back to what's worked. You know, there's a lot of noise made about Iran-Contra, right, during the 1980s. There was 19 other covert action programs that were run directed at dropping the Soviet Union. And they did it by being clever and nimble and fast, and it worked. We have it there is a reservoir of talent, and capability, and innovation to do this. Let's not get defeated by a bunch of barbarians that don't view what we have here as a way of life that's acceptable to them. So with that, I'm happy to take